Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm about to tell you the most terrifying story any parent could ever live through. If you are new on my channel, please subscribe and comment where you are watching from. 3 months ago, I thought I was protecting my children by letting my husband's brother stay with us. Uncle Marcus seemed like a blessing, someone who could watch 6-year-old Ella and 9-year-old Brian while my husband Kevin and I worked our exhausting jobs. But I was wrong. So terribly, dangerously wrong. The man I welcomed into my home, the man I trusted with my most precious gifts, was a monster hiding behind a caring smile. While I was at the hospital saving other people's lives, he was destroying my children's innocence right in my own living room. I still remember the moment I discovered the truth. My hands were shaking as I stared at that tiny hidden camera screen, watching footage that made my blood run cold. There was Marcus, sitting on our familiar brown couch with my baby girl Ella, showing her things on his laptop that no child should ever see. "Remember, this is our special secret game," I heard him whisper to my daughter through the camera's microphone. "If you tell mommy or daddy, they won't understand. They might get very angry." In that moment, I realized that every instinct I'd had was right. Every strange drawing Ella made, every time Brian avoided eye contact, every gut feeling that something was wrong, it was all real. The monster had been living under my roof, and I had been thanking him for helping with my children. What I'm about to share with you will shock you. It will make you question everyone you trust with your own children. But I have to tell this story, because what I discovered that day changed everything. The hidden camera I installed to calm my fears instead revealed my worst nightmare, and what I had to do to save my children. Well, that's a story every parent needs to hear. This is the story of how I caught a predator, saved my babies, and learned that sometimes the greatest danger comes from the people we trust most. Sandra's hands shook as she stared at the small screen in her bedroom. The hidden camera she had placed in the living room 3 days ago had finally captured something. But what she saw made her stomach feel like it was falling into a deep, dark hole. There was Uncle Marcus, sitting on their familiar brown couch with little Ella beside him. But this wasn't the caring uncle she thought she knew. On the TV screen was something no child should ever see. Pictures of grown-ups doing things that made Sandra feel sick. And Marcus was pointing at the screen, talking to Ella in a quiet voice. "Remember, this is our special secret game," Marcus was saying to her 6-year-old daughter. "Just like we talked about before. If you tell mommy or daddy, they won't understand. They might get very angry." Sandra's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She watched as Ella nodded slowly, her small face looking confused and scared. The little girl's eyes were wide, staring at the terrible things on the screen. "Good girl," Marcus said, patting Ella's head. "Now, let's practice what we learned yesterday." Sandra slammed the laptop shut. She couldn't watch anymore. Her whole body was shaking, and she felt like she might throw up. This was her brother-in-law, her husband Kevin's older brother, the man they had trusted with their most precious gifts, their children. Hot tears poured down her face as she sat on the edge of her bed. How long had this been going on? What had he done to Brian, her 9-year-old son? What had he already done to Ella? Sandra's mind raced back to 3 weeks ago when Uncle Marcus had first arrived. It had started so simply. Marcus had called Kevin one evening, sounding sad and tired. "I hate to ask," Marcus had said over the phone, "but I lost my apartment. The landlord raised the rent too high, and I can't afford it anymore. Could I maybe stay with you guys for just a few weeks? Just until I find something new?" Kevin had looked at Sandra with questioning eyes. They were both so busy. Kevin worked long hours at the car repair shop, and Sandra was a nurse at the hospital. Between their jobs, getting the kids to school, buying groceries, and keeping the house clean, they barely had time to breathe. Of course, Kevin had said into the phone, "Family helps family. You can stay as long as you need." Sandra had felt a little worried, but also relieved. Marcus could help watch Ella and Brian after school. No more rushing home from work. No more asking neighbors to keep an eye on the kids. It seemed like the perfect solution. Marcus had arrived the next day with just 2 bags and a big smile. He was Kevin's older brother by 5 years, tall and thin with kind eyes and a gentle voice. The kids had always liked him during holiday visits. Uncle Marcus, Ella had squealed, running to hug his legs. "Hey there, little princess," Marcus had said, picking her up and spinning her around. "I get to spend lots of time with you and Brian now." Brian had been more shy, but he'd warmed up quickly when Marcus started talking about video games and sports. For the first week, everything seemed wonderful. Marcus helped with homework, made snacks, and even cooked dinner a few times. The kids loved having him around. Sandra came home from work to find the house clean and the children happy and fed. "This is working out great," Kevin had said one evening as they got ready for bed. "The kids love him, and it's taking so much stress off us," Sandra had agreed. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice had whispered that something felt different. She couldn't put her finger on what it was. The second week brought the first strange signs. Ella, who was usually a chatterbox, became quieter. She would sit at the dinner table, picking at her food, staring at her plate instead of talking about her day. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" Sandra had asked one evening. Ella had just nodded and asked to be excused from the table. Brian started acting odd too. He would disappear into his room right after school and wouldn't come out until dinner. When Sandra asked him about his day, he would give short answers and change the subject. "Kids go through phases," Kevin had said when Sandra mentioned her concerns. "They're probably just adjusting to having Uncle Marcus here. It's a big change." But Sandra's mother instincts kept telling her something was wrong. She started paying closer attention to little things. One afternoon, she came home early from work and found Ella sitting on the couch, drawing in her coloring book. But when Sandra looked closer, her blood went cold. Instead of the usual princesses and flowers, Ella was drawing pictures of stick figures doing things that made no sense. Dark, strange pictures that looked angry and scary. "What's this picture about, honey?" Sandra had asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Ella had quickly closed the coloring book and shrugged. "Just drawing," she'd said quietly. That night, Sandra had found more disturbing drawings hidden under Ella's mattress. Pictures of people without clothes. Pictures of big people and little people doing things together that made Sandra's stomach hurt. "Where did you learn to draw pictures like this?" Sandra had asked gently. Ella's eyes had gotten wide with fear. I don't know. I just thought of it." But Sandra could tell her daughter was lying. 6-year-olds don't just think of things like that. The next day, Sandra had asked Brian about his after-school time with Uncle Marcus. "We just watch TV and play games," Brian had said, not looking at her. "What kind of games?" Brian had shifted uncomfortably. "Just games. Normal games." But Brian couldn't meet her eyes, and Sandra knew her son well enough to know when he was keeping secrets. That evening, Sandra had tried to talk to Kevin about her growing concerns. "I think something's wrong with how the kids are acting," she'd said as they folded laundry together. "What do you mean?" "Ella's drawing weird pictures. Brian won't talk about what he does with Marcus. They're both acting secretive and scared." Kevin had sighed. "Sandra, you worry too much. Kids act strange sometimes. Maybe they're just tired, or maybe they're picking up on your stress." "My stress? You've been watching them like a hawk ever since Marcus moved in. Maybe they can feel that you don't trust the situation." Sandra had felt hurt and confused. Was she imagining things? Was she being unfair to Marcus? But then came the night that changed everything. Sandra had gotten up at 8 a.m. to get a glass of water. As she walked past the living room, she heard quiet sounds coming from the TV. She peeked around the corner and saw Marcus sitting alone on the couch, watching something on his laptop with headphones on. The light from the screen showed his face, and Sandra gasped. His expression was not normal. His eyes looked hungry and mean in a way that made her skin crawl. She quickly went back to bed, but couldn't sleep. Something very wrong. The next morning, Sandra made a decision that would change everything. She went to the electronics store and bought a tiny hidden camera. Her hands were shaking as she paid for it. "I'm probably being crazy," she told herself. "But if I'm wrong, no one will ever know. And if I'm right," she couldn't finish that thought. That afternoon, While Marcus was out buying groceries and the kids were at school, Sandra set up the camera. She hid it behind a picture frame on the shelf, pointing it toward the couch where Marcus usually sat with the children. For 3 days, she checked the camera footage every night after everyone went to bed. For 3 days, she saw nothing unusual. Just Marcus helping with homework, making snacks, and watching normal TV shows with the kids. Sandra started to feel foolish. Maybe Kevin was right. Maybe she was letting her imagination run wild. But on the 4th night, everything changed. Sandra was alone in her bedroom, checking the camera footage one more time before going to sleep. Kevin was working late at the shop, and Marcus had put the kids to bed hours ago. She fast-forwarded through most of the evening, seeing nothing unusual. Marcus reading on the couch, the kids playing quietly, a normal family evening. But then she saw something that made her blood freeze. Around p.m., after Kevin had left for work, Marcus had called Ella into the living room. Sandra watched as her little daughter came running in, still in her pajamas. "Come sit with Uncle Marcus," she heard him say through the camera's tiny microphone. "I want to show you something special." Sandra's finger hovered over the pause button, but she forced herself to keep watching. Marcus pulled out his laptop and placed it on the coffee table. Even from the camera's angle, Sandra could see that what appeared on the screen was not meant for children's eyes. "Remember our special secret game?" Marcus asked Ella in a voice that sounded sweet but felt poisonous. Ella nodded slowly, looking nervous. "Good. Now, let's practice what we learned yesterday. First, let's watch this to remember how it works." Sandra watched in horror as Marcus showed her innocent 6-year-old daughter images and videos that no child should ever see. She watched as he pointed to the screen and explained things that made Sandra feel sick to her stomach. "This is how grown-ups show love," Marcus was saying, "and sometimes when a little girl is very special, a grown-up might want to show her this kind of love too." Ella looked confused and scared. "But Mommy said nobody should touch me in private places." "That's right," Marcus said smoothly. "But this is different. This is a special secret between you and me. And if you tell Mommy or Daddy, they won't understand. They might get very angry and send me away. Then we couldn't play our special games anymore." Sandra felt like she was drowning. This was actually happening. This monster was grooming her baby girl, poisoning her innocent mind with twisted ideas. The video continued, and Sandra watched Marcus guide Ella through practicing positions and movements that made Sandra's heart break into a million pieces. Nothing too extreme yet, but Sandra could see exactly where this was heading. "You're such a good girl," Marcus kept saying. "This is our special secret. Promise me you won't tell anyone." "I promise," Ella whispered, looking scared and confused. "Good. Now, let's see if Brian wants to join our game." Sandra's blood turned to ice. Brian, her 9-year-old son. Marcus was going to do the same thing to Brian. She watched as Marcus called Brian into the living room. Her son came in rubbing his eyes, looking like he'd been asleep. "Brian, come sit with me and Ella. We're playing a special game." "What kind of game?" Brian asked, sounding tired. "A grown-up game. A secret game that only special kids get to play." Sandra watched her son's face change as Marcus showed him the same horrible images he'd shown Ella. Brian's eyes got wide with shock and confusion. "I don't think we should be watching this," Brian said, backing away from the couch. "It's okay," Marcus said in that same sweet, poisonous voice. "This is how we learn about grown-up things. Your mom and dad want you to learn, but they're too busy to teach you. That's why they asked me to show you." Sandra watched as Marcus lied to her children, twisting their trust and innocence into something dark. "But this doesn't feel right," Brian said, looking scared. "That's normal," Marcus said. "All kids feel that way at first. But once you learn how to play the game, you'll like it." "Ella likes it now, don't you, Ella?" Ella nodded slowly, but Sandra could see the fear in her daughter's eyes. "See," Marcus said to Brian, "Ella learned how to play, and now she's a very special girl. Do you want to be special too?" Sandra couldn't watch anymore. She slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, where she threw up everything in her stomach. When she came back to the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to figure out what to do. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold her phone. She had to protect her children. She had to stop this monster. But how? If she confronted Mark now, he might deny everything. He might say she was crazy. He might even run away before she could prove what he'd done. If she told Kevin, would he believe her? Marcus was his brother. They'd grown up together. Kevin trusted him completely. Sandra realized she needed more evidence. She needed to catch Marcus in the act, with no way for him to deny what he was doing, but the thought of letting this continue for even one more day made her feel sick. Every moment she waited was another moment her children were being hurt. She looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. Kevin would be home from work soon. Marcus and the kids were asleep. Sandra made a decision. Tomorrow, she would watch the camera footage in real time. She would catch Marcus doing these terrible things, and then she would have proof that no one could deny. But as she lay in bed waiting for Kevin to come home, Sandra couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen. The fear in Ella's eyes, the confusion on Brian's face, the way Marcus had smiled as he poisoned her children's minds. She thought about all the times she'd thanked Marcus for helping with the kids, all the times she'd told him how grateful she was to have him there, all the times she'd left her precious children alone with a monster. When Kevin finally came home, Sandra pretended to be asleep. She couldn't, not until she had more proof, not until she was sure he would believe her. But as she lay there in the dark, listening to Kevin brush his teeth and get ready for bed, Sandra knew that tomorrow would bring the most difficult day of her life. She had to save her children. She had to stop Marcus. And she had to do it in a way that would make sure he could never hurt another child again. The hidden camera would give her the evidence she needed. Tomorrow, she would watch and wait. And when Marcus showed evil face again, she would be ready to destroy him. But first, she had to survive the night, knowing that the monster who had been hurting her babies was sleeping just down the hall. Sandra woke up the next morning of Ella screaming. She jumped out of bed and ran down the hallway, her heart pounding. In the kitchen, Ella standing on a chair, pointing at the floor and crying, "Spider! Big spider!" But as Sandra looked at her daughter's terrified face, she realized this wasn't just about a spider. Ella was shaking all over, her eyes wide with the same fear Sandra had seen in the camera footage. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sandra said, scooping Ella into her arms. "Mommy's here." But as she held her daughter, Sandra felt Ella's whole body go stiff. The little girl pulled away and wouldn't look at her mom's face. "Where's Uncle Marcus?" Ella asked in a small voice. Sandra's stomach twisted. "He's still sleeping." "Why?" He told me to come get him if I got scared. He said he's the only one who can make me feel better." The words hit Sandra like a punch to the chest. Marcus was making Ella depend on him. He was making